Well, good afternoon, everyone. As Kina was so kind to say, I am Daryl McNair. I'm with Colonial Gardens, but I like to think of myself as a caregiver. I have been a caregiver for both my mother and my father, my mother more so than my father. And I have been in senior health care, I guess it's going on 18 years now, three of which I've been here at this particular community. And all we do is memory care. So a lot of people just try to figure out, why is he here in front of me? Hopefully between what Kina shared and what I just shared, you'll kind of get an understanding on what I have come across. What we're going to do today, I mentioned it to Kina a little bit earlier, is we're going to talk about ourselves. We're going to talk about caregivers. So many times we forget about ourselves. We put all of our energy, all of our time, all of our resources into those that we're caring for. And then I see all too often that we forget about ourselves. And then what do we do when we're sick? Who's going to care for our loved one when that happens? So how I'd like to start off with that is I'd just like to share with everybody that just like in the case of dementia, you end up having early, middle, and later stages of dementia. There's actually early, middle, and later stages of caregiving. And if you'll just bear with me for a moment, I'd like to just explain a little bit of how those look, and we'll just kind of move on from there. The progression of caregiving, if a person is an early staged caregiver, your role is still a little bit of a supportive role. And a lot of times we find ourselves to the point that we don't know how much support to give, because that individual might be in early stage dementia. So they might still be able to drive or walk or run or do a lot of the activities of daily living that they used to do before. So, but they start getting a little more confused. They start having some issues with bill keeping or some of those everyday occurrences that they used to handle on their own before. So when they're in that early stage of the diagnosis, the question comes up, how much do I have to give at that point? How much care, if you will, do I have to supply? And a lot of times that care is more supportive than anything else. Then we find the middle stages of caregiving, and that's where we start recognizing that we're providing a little bit greater level of care to our loved ones. Maybe now we're starting to redirect them, and safety is starting to come into play. We're trying to keep them safe. We find that we're answering those same questions over and over again. Those type of things start coming into play. So now we're starting to put a little more time into it. We're being a little more intentional when it comes to that care we're providing. And then the later stages of caregiving. A lot of times with that later stage of caregiving, we find ourselves where our role is more, we're focusing on preserving the quality of life and making sure that there is that dignity there that our loved ones still deserve. Now, throughout all three of these stages of caregiving, there's one thing in common, and that's the fact that we as caregivers forget about ourselves. And that's easy to do. That is something that is very common, because we want to make sure that we're able to give as much as we can. But just if you don't mind, who out there has experienced, I don't know, some of these emotions or these feelings I'm about to state? And you might have seen some of this information in an earlier email that I've sent out if you receive our weekly tips of the week. But Have you felt at any time of being a caregiver, whether you're still currently caregiving or it's been in the past, have you felt stressed or stressed more often? Have you felt overwhelmed, or are you constantly worried about this, that, or the other thing? Are you feeling a little more tired? Are you losing interest in the things you used to do? Or are you finding that you don't have time to do? I'm going to put have time in air quotes, but he's finding that you don't have time to do the things that you used to do or that you used to love to do. Are you feeling sad more often? Are you noticing that your weight's starting to fluctuate, either go up or go down? I can handle a little weight going down at this point, personally, but hopefully not from the stress of caregiving. Appetite, is that starting to change? Are your sleep patterns starting to change? Those things, if you find those things are occurring, it's completely natural. It is something that happens when we just begin giving our all and being a caregiver. So don't let it stress you if you start noticing how my weight's fluctuating. But one thing we want to make sure that you do is you look for those outlets so that you can still take time for yourself. Whether it's coming to a session such as this that's provided through Lisa's Care Connection, whether it's going to a support group meeting, or whether it's just taking a moment and spending 25, 30 minutes with a friend, or even 10 minutes just on the phone, laughing and joking about something else. We all have to have, as I mentioned, that outlet, and hopefully that is something that we're able to do. So I'd like to list to you a couple of factors that the Cleveland Clinic gives. And if you notice me looking down, it's because I do have my notes. I like to try to stay on task. But the Cleveland Clinic mentions some factors that that we might run into as a caregiver. And I just want to kind of go over those with you. One of the big things that I've talked about for years is role confusion. Our roles begin to change. And for a number of us, that is a little different. And it's hard for us to accept that because we may have been, in my case, I was the son for both my father and my mother for many, many years. And then all of a sudden, I became their caregiver. And it's hard to differentiate whether you're providing care or you're the son. In some cases, some of us may be the husband and have been the husband for 30, 40 years. And then all of a sudden, our loved one does not recognize us, our spouse does not recognize us as the husband, and which makes it a little bit more difficult to care for them in such ways as helping them get dressed. Because they might understand enough that, yes, you're trying to help them. They might not recognize you as the husband, but they still wish to keep their dignity and don't want you in the room with them, but yet they need help getting dressed. One of the things that we have to understand as a caregiver is that as the disease progresses, unfortunately, we have to take our feelings and realize that even though it might hurt us to a certain degree, that we have to take that step to the side because the other person has deemed it inappropriate. The last thing we would want to do is to argue with our loved one to say, no, it's okay because I am. Because no matter how much you stress that you are whatever your role is, fill in the blank, no matter how much you stress that, if in their mind you are not, you are not. and nothing you say is going to change that. So that's where we start going. In the beginning, we go through those thoughts of denial and fear and anxiety and anger. And then even in those middle stages and the later stages of caregiving, those same feelings can come back and hit us in the back of the head one more time. And it does not make it easier to continue doing this job. But this is our job now. My mother, who passed away at 90, it was always interesting. I say that tongue in cheek, because I would say to my mother, Mom, you need to shower, or okay, you went in there and used the restroom. Have you cleaned yourself? Have you wiped yourself? Were you able to handle it the best you could? And when it comes down to it, my mother would look at me and say, baby, because no matter what, I was always her baby. Baby, I'm your mother. You're not going to shower me. Or I'm your mother. You're not going to clean me up. And that's when, as a caregiver, I have to accept the fact that not make her accept the fact that I'm here for her, that I'm trying to care for her. It's at that point that as a caregiver, I had to accept the fact that now she is uncomfortable with that. And the best way for me to be a caregiver, the best way for me to provide care is to bring somebody in to assist with that part of the care. Luckily, I have two sisters. One sister lived further away than the other one. And my sister, Deborah, was quick to step up and want to help in that regard. Now, in some cases, we might not have a sibling, their sibling or our sibling or someone else that we can just turn to right away. And that's when we have to say, okay, maybe now it's time for me to find an agency that might be able to help come in and help bathe my mother 2-3 times a week. So I know that she's keeping as clean as possible for that week. When it comes to dressing, it was very interesting. I would turn around and lay out her clothing, but sometimes she would come out, and if it was a button up type blouse, this button would be buttoned down here. The thing for me to then do was not make a big deal of it. I would just make a big deal of the clothing manufacturer. I don't understand how they make these clothes anymore, where the buttons don't line up with the shirt holes. May I help you with that? Or better yet, let me help you with that. And then I would just do one button at a time, not undo all the buttons, because again, we want to preserve that dignity and that respect for her, but do one button at a time and make those adjustments. And at that point, that was okay. So although it was a new point in the journey, just like if we're traveling down the road and we come across construction, or as I did on I-20 today, I ran across an accident in the construction zone. It was a matter of finding a new way around that to still come into the office. Other things we might run into are a lot of us, sometimes we feel like we're out of control of the situation. We are now spending money on things we hadn't done before, or we're starting to not be able to help that individual when it comes to pain, or we don't understand why they're not quite as adept as they were with this particular task as they once were. And again, that's where we step back, realize The fact that we don't understand it is moot. The fact that it's occurring to them at that particular time is the important part. So today, if they're unable to feed themselves, it's not a matter of saying to them, Mom, you know how to do this. You know, all you have to do is bring it up to your mouth, because at that particular moment, maybe she doesn't know. There might be that disconnect there, and those synapses aren't clicking like they once did. So then it's just a matter of, let me help you with that, Mom. And then you help her the best way you can. Maybe not by doing it for her, not by feeding her, because once you start feeding her, then that can become the norm. And we don't necessarily want to take away from their independence, no matter how limited that might be. However, what we can do when it comes to feeding is possibly saying, well, let me help you with that. Then we assess the situation. If they're having trouble getting the utensil into their hand, then we can place that utensil into their hand. If they're having trouble holding the utensil in their hand, then we can end up getting a fatter utensil to put into their hand where it's easier for them to hold. So we assess the situation, we adapt to whatever the situation happens to be. So we place that in their hand, and then we see if they're able to make the connection with the fork, spoon, whatever it happens to be, with the food and scoop it up. If not, then we can help them scoop it up and see at that point if they're able to bring that utensil to their mouth. Because let's face it, it's dementia. They might not have that connection for feeding themselves at lunch, but at dinner, they might sit there and finish their meal and ask for more. Has anybody experienced anything like that? Okay.
I didn't personally, but from someone in my support group. And what they found was find different utensils. Some of so like children's utensils, or there used to be a company, I don't know now with COVID if they're still around, that has some that instead of like just a straight edge of a spoon, it was like a handle. And they found that the loved one could, maneuver that all the time as opposed to the other side.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. My father had Lou Gehrig's disease. Some of us know it as ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And so what happens with that a lot of times with individuals with this disease, it too is progressive. He lost the use of his appendages. And so he ended up getting to the point where he could no longer handle a utensil that was normal size. Or when he lost the use of his vocal cords, he couldn't handle a pen or a pencil of normal size. So we ended up getting him a fat marker and a big old sheet of paper, construction paper, for him to be able to write with, or a fat utensil so he could still grab it and control it as much as he could. Now he would miss because his arms, he lost the use of his arms as well, but we would use what we use here at the community, what we call the hand over hand technique. He would be able to hold that fat utensil, and so that he can still feel like he's feeding himself, I would put my hand under his hand, or his hand over my hand, and guide his hand to his mouth so he could still feed himself, as opposed to me feeding him and making him feel as if he was a child, as opposed to the 83-year-old man who went through 3 wars. He was able to preserve some of that dignity and respect. Again, it was no longer a matter of me saying to him, come on, Dad, you can do this, because he couldn't do it. And it's the same thing with our loved ones with dementia. At that particular time, even though they might have been able to do it at breakfast, at that particular time, they're unable to do it. So we just step back and adapt the best way we can, where we can help them and preserve their dignity. Sometimes, as caregivers, we might place unreasonable demands on those that we're caring for. This can become a trigger to a behavior that none of us necessarily benefit from. And so by placing those burdens on themselves, or in most cases, we put those burdens on our own selves because we feel like, oh, well, today I'm going to take mom to the park and we're going to go for a walk. But then as we're going to the car, she decides she doesn't want to go. But in my head, I've already planned the day out. I've thought about what it's going to be like. We're going to go to the park, and I know the ice cream man's going to be there, and I'm going to end up getting that popsicle that she loves, cherry, not any of the other colors, but she wants that red cherry popsicle. And we're going to sit at that one bench that she loves over there by the gazebo so she can look at the tulips because that's her favorite flower. I have all this in my head, but when all of a sudden she says that she doesn't want to do it, or she starts exhibiting a behavior as we're going to the car, my unrealistic burden that I've placed on myself is that we're still going to do that. And then the behavior that ensues is not all that great. But instead of just backing off and saying, all right, I'm going to change this game plan, maybe we can do this later, or maybe tomorrow. It's just a matter of saying, all righty, we're going to adapt. So hopefully bringing some of those to light will help us recognize it when those occurrences happen again. Whereas we're not getting that fatigue or that frustration to overtake our lives. But if we do, then it's a matter of having an outlet. What would you all say has been a great outlet for you? Or are we even taking an outlet?
What kinds of things would you say are outlets? Let's say Betty in the afternoon is sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is that an outlet for me then to kind of do what I want to do and relax and take advantage of that time? Would that be an outlet?
Yes, sir. That would be an outlet.
And
That is,
sometimes taking a ride in the car,
yes.
if there's someone in the home,
Mhm.
just go out and drive for a little bit, someplace where it's more relaxing. Is that kind of things that you're talking about?
That is perfect, my friend.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I do those kind of things when it's the opportunity. I like some of the things you're saying that kind of clarifies, particularly like the changing of the plan. I'm a planner, and yeah, I can run into that. But in the time I've been doing this now, I'm starting to learn that it's a losing battle because you aren't going to have fun. It's going to be, you said you're going to get reaction, and so the day is not going to be fun. So you might as well just back off and say, well, what would you like to do, or something like that? Try to just change it all together. And then you said something about try later. Yes, in a lot of ways. If you run into a brick wall, don't try to break it down, just back off and then give it some time and see again. And sometimes the reaction is totally different.
I call that a reset. That they have reset. That thought process in their head is now gone for what they wanted to do or what they thought they didn't want to do. And so now they've reset, and what your plans were may now work.
Yeah, that's a good word, reset. Yeah, I like that.
One of the things that I found was getting respite care. And each state and each agency is different. But what I was able to do was to use my respite hours in a small block instead of large 4 or 5 hours at a time, just a couple of hours. And I didn't leave the house. I just went in another room, relaxed. And that, because sometimes, especially if it's an agency coming in, you may not be as comfortable with the person coming if it's not the same person each time. So you know you're right there if anything happens, but you still can go in the room and watch TV or do some of your other things.
Very good point. As a matter of fact, how we're going to close out our session today in just a few minutes is going to be about talking about respite care. So thank you. That's going to bring up for a nice segue. And what you're saying kind of flows in with what I was saying earlier. And I like the way that you phrased that, because you said when the opportunity arises, when you had the caregiver coming in through the respite program, you said you didn't necessarily go anywhere, you just happened to go into the other room. But when that opportunity arises, whether someone is taking a nap, whether they're having a good moment just sitting there listening to music or watching TV or looking at the hummingbirds at the feeder outside the window, that's when we step away for a moment, kind of come into our own self at that point, and have that breather so that we're able to take care of ourselves, even if it's just for 5 or 10 minutes. In the care of someone coming into the home for that respite piece, then for that hour, or going out and taking a drive. I've known folks who would say, you know what, one thing that my husband loves to do is to go for a ride. That will calm him down quicker than anything else. And they would go for a ride, and her husband would sit and just look out of the window, and that gave her a sense of peace at that point. And it was uplifting to her because of the fact she knew that he had something going on now that he enjoyed. But at the same token, it gave her a moment where she was not answering repetitious questions. She was not running to go do this. She wasn't trying to change his briefs. She was not trying to feed him. It was just a moment that she could breathe. And that helps when it comes to caregiver support and relieving that caregiver fatigue. Because too often I have seen caregivers who I've talked with, especially over the last 3 years in my role here at the building, they will call me and for a year talk to me about, I'm thinking about placing my mother, I'm thinking about placing my father, I'm thinking about placement of my wife. But then they hold off and they hold off and they hold off. And next thing I know, I find out they're in the hospital because they've burned themselves out, or they have had an underlying issue, medical issue, that they have put off, and they've put off their medical appointment because they feel as if I cannot take a moment to go to my appointment because I have to still watch over them. If something happens to you and you're in the hospital, again, like I've seen so often, then there's no one who's caring for the loved one unless it's set up in some emergency last-minute situation. So we have to take care of ourselves. We have to recognize the signs. I'm getting stressed. I'm getting tired. Things that used to not bother me are now overwhelming me. I'm starting to worry about things. I'm starting to forget things myself. I am gaining weight. I'm starting to feel sad more often. I'm not sleeping. If I may, one thing many of you have heard me talk about in the past is create a journal. If I'm not mistaken, Lisa has a session that she does periodically where she talks about journaling. When you're able to journal items and things that are going on in your life, or things that are going on in the life of your loved one. Not only do you have it readily available should you need to bring it up to the medical professional, be it yours or be it theirs, but you're able to look back and start seeing that pattern. And in my journal, I said that last Wednesday, I had this headache that out of 1 to 10 was an 8. And then that Wednesday prior, I ended up with a headache and it was a 7. And that Wednesday before, well, now you see that pattern. You can go back. What else did we do on that Wednesday? Because maybe there's something you're doing on Wednesday that's triggering the headaches. Maybe it's a food. Maybe it's, yeah, mama loves a slaw dog from Rush's, but if you're going to Rush's and you're overloading your hot dog with vinegar, maybe the vinegar is giving you that issue. But you can start looking at the journal entries and start seeing what that pattern is, sharing it with your medical professional, and maybe they might be able to come up with a way to help you. So, so going back to outlets, those drives, taking advantage of the opportunity when it arises, when they take a nap, just picking up the phone and calling a friend. A lot of times we'll say, well, since I've been caring for mom, I haven't really kept in contact with my friends. So I feel bad calling them now. It's been a year. It's been 2 years. But if you pick up the phone and give them a call and just say, hey, I have about 5-10 minutes. It's been a while since I've talked with you. I wanted to call and see how you're doing. I apologize for not calling you. I've just been caring for my mom. 9 times out of 10, they'll understand. And they might just want to listen to what you have going on. And that release will make you feel better. And maybe you might be able to start scheduling those calls more often, just to have that outlet. And of course, talking to a therapist. There's so many of us think that a therapist has that negative stigma, but sometimes it's just that outlet we need.
I was going to say, the thing about picking up the phone and calling friends, one thing that you have to be careful of is to not burden them with what you're going through. First of all, make the call about them. Secondly, kind of feel out, do they really want to hear something about mom, or are they just saying, how's mom, just to be polite? And that was something I didn't do as well. And recently, though, I play cards on the computer, and I recently reconnected online with a lady who I hadn't probably talked to in 2 years, and the first thing she did was ask about mom. So I knew that those occasions when she asked, well, through the chat, because we're playing, that she did care. But like I said, with some other people who I thought were friends, I realized I put too much about what I was going through on them. And as opposed to, like I said, just
Very
saying,
good point.
hey, Daryl, how are you today? And let you share your life and take that and say, wow, I'm really glad you're there, whatever, and kind of move on.
And that brings up a very good point, and I thank you for sharing that. A lot of times our friends, they'll listen for a little while, but they might not want to listen the whole time. And sometimes we have to start looking for new outlets. And those new outlets, the perfect place, sorry, Keena, I'm going to give you a plug here, would be something like Eliza's Care Connection. And asking, do you have a support group for this? Because at that support group, that's where you can share what's going on in your life with somebody that is living through that themselves. And at that point, there's that connection. And when you say, I just feel this way, 9 times out of 10, there'll be somebody in that support group that says, oh, I understand, because this happened last week And I understand totally. And when they share their part, you understand that they do understand. And now you have a new bond, and maybe that bond can happen outside of the support group. So it's sometimes just a matter of looking outside of what our old circle of influence, our old circle of friends used to be. So I'd like to fast forward a little bit here because we have about 10 minutes left. We were talking about respite. Respite comes in many different ways. Sometimes it's formal, sometimes it's not as formal. When we have an opportunity and all this COVID stuff is over, Lisa's had just started the daycare that was happening across the street at the church. That's a perfect outlet. We can take our loved one to something like that. We can go across the street and enjoy something going over at Lisa's, whether it's just a lunch, whether we're getting a cup of coffee, we're checking out to see what breads are available. That gives us a moment to get away and have that breather. That is a respite. That's true respite in its in its definition. Then there are some facilities out there that will have a respite program. If you think if you have your someone that you know that is getting married, or you want to take a vacation, or you just need a few days break, some facilities will offer a respite program and you always have to check with them because some have a minimum stay. Some might be 7 days, some might be 14 days, but there's different agencies out there that you can check into that might allow you to have someone come into the home for an hour or two a day. And that too would give you a respite. One thing I want you guys to, if you don't mind, I'd love for you to write down this website, www.alz.org/SC. That's alz.org/SC. That is the South Carolina chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. Excuse me. On there, there's a search bar that you can just type in respite. Or you can email me at Daryl, DARYL, .McNair, MCNAIR, at JEASeniorliving.com, and I'll email you this link. But that is to the Alzheimer's Association, and they have a plethora of information that you can use and read. But if you type in the search bar about respite, there's a whole page there on caregiver respite and some of the things that are offered by the South Carolina and other states as well, but the South Carolina chapter. I'm going to read something to you from one of their web pages, so bear with me as I read. But the South Carolina chapter of the Alzheimer's Association provides short-term respite, time away from caregiving responsibility, for family caregivers through what they call a voucher program. This program is possible thanks to funding through the South Carolina Department of Mental Health, and it's administered in partnership with the South Carolina Department on Aging. If you are a family caregiver for someone with dementia, it states, please call the Alzheimer's Association at 1-800-272-3900. That's 1-800-272-3900 to learn more on how to get an application process started. The South Carolina chapter of the Alzheimer's Association has partnered up with the South Carolina Department on Aging, and they'll help you with getting this voucher. The voucher will pretty much pay for X number of hours so that you can have a break. And they'll explain to you how that can be broken up. But the long and short of this last 50 minutes that we've been talking is that you are a caregiver and you're doing the best you can with giving care. But you want to take care of yourself. Because if you don't care for yourself, you can't be any help for those that you're caring for. So take advantage of the opportunities that are out there and the resources that are out there, which will allow you a moment to care for yourself. If you missed it, my email is Daryl, DARYL, .McNair, MCNAIR, @JEASeniorliving.com. I send out a weekly email. Most of the time it's weekly. A weekly email of tips that hopefully will help with this caregiving journey that you're on. But probably about, I don't know, Kina, once every 6 weeks, I come back and I say something about caregiving for your own self. It's about them, yes, but it has to be about you. It has to be about you. So with that, I'll turn it over to any questions you might have. I think I saw Miss Elena's hand go up. And then after that, I'll turn it over to Kina to close us out.
Yeah, Daryl, in Los Angeles, since some people may be in California, we have alzla.org. And that's LA.org.
Excellent, thank you.
And of course, we have Lisa's.
Of course. We can't forget Lisa's. Lisa's is the best kept secret in our areas. And once people find out about Lisa's and about Kina and Marty and the volunteers and the things that they do and the resource that they are, they will literally come for miles to get there. There's a town here called Beaufort, South Carolina. And I guess about a year ago, we were doing this session at Lisa's prior to COVID. And we had, I don't know, 15, 20 people there. And I saw this new face in the crowd. And so I asked this woman, I said, well, where are you from? Thank you for coming. And she said, well, I'm up from Beaufort, which is 2-3 hours away. And she came because she heard about Lisa's. And after the session was done, she started asking me a bunch of questions. And I said, okay. And I was making notes and I said, hold on one second. And Kina, I don't know where you were on that particular day, but Marty was there. And I said, Marty, can you join us for a moment? This is, and I introduced her to the woman. And I said, she has questions about this, this, and this. And the woman explained her thoughts to Marty. And Marty said, I'll be right back. And we stood there and we talked about another 5 minutes. Marty comes back with lists with papers. And she had these resources on the pages, including some that were around the Beaufort area. Now, mind you, Beaufort is tucked away, kind of like behind this tree and under this house, and you can't get to it easily. But there were places that this woman could reach out to, and she had them listed. And she said, what you want to do, even though I have them listed 1, 2, 3, you want to call number 3 first. Then you want to call number 5. If number 5 can't answer that, you want to call number 1. And then she had them highlighted and renumbered so this woman could find the answers from somebody closer than Columbia. And that's just the resource you have in Lisa's. They are fabulous. Kina and Marty do whatever it takes to get you the information that you need. then it's just a matter of us taking that information and executing the plan that they've said might work out for us. And a lot of times that comes into being the hard part for us to say, okay, I have my steps. Now it's just a matter of doing it. But we have a blessing with them at Lisa. So with that, I'll, unless anyone else has another question or some input, I will bring it to a close and give it to Kina and have her close us out.